get this. You're wading through the streets of Punta Gorda, Florida. It's 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene just hammered the coast. But instead of dodging, tourists and potholes, gotta watch out for bull sharks.
No way.
Seriously.
Oh.
They've been seen swimming in these flooded streets, and as if that wasn't crazy enough, now Hurricane Milton, this Category 4 beast, is barreling towards the exact same spot, adding insult to injury, right?
Oh, man, that's rough. Didn't Tampa Bay, and I know it's in Florida, but didn't they say they haven't seen a direct hit in like a century?
Exactly. Think about that. The last time a storm this massive took aim at this area, people were riding horses to work. It's mind-boggling. So let's dive into this.
What's really wild is that Tampa Bay is basically a sitting duck.
How so?
Well, the area's got tons of history, which is cool and all, but that also means a lot of its infrastructure is stuck in the past. We're talking about a region that hasn't had to handle a direct hit from a major hurricane in living memory, and now they're staring down Milton, which is bouncing between a Category 4 and a 5.
It's easy to throw around these hurricane categories, but can you really blame folks for not totally getting the difference between, say, a 4 and a 5? What does that actually mean when you're down there on the ground?
Okay, picture this. A Category 4 hurricane, it's packing winds so strong they can rip a whole house off its foundation, turn everyday stuff into deadly projectiles. Trees? Forget about them. They wouldn't just be down, they'd be stripped bare. And power. You could be in the dark for months. Communities completely paralyzed.
Wow.
And a Category 5, man, that's like taking a Category 4 and cranking it up to 11. Total devastation. The kind that can literally reshape the landscape, Change lives forever.
It's just unimaginable. And speaking of impact, this article mentions there are 5.9 million people under mandatory evacuation orders across 11 counties.
11 counties.
And a lot of these folks are still picking up the pieces from Helene. Imagine the stress of having to run from your home, not once, but twice in just a couple of weeks. This article talks about this guy, Evan Purcell, who's dealing with that exact thing on Anna Maria Island. He says he's got this pit in his stomach about this one. Can you blame him?
Ugh, no, not at all. I mean, think about that emotional toll. You're just starting to catch your breath, right? Beginning to rebuild, and then, bam, another evacuation order. Just the logistics alone have got to be a nightmare. They were trying to clear debris from Helene while getting evacuation routes open. It's like trying to organize a parade during a citywide yard sale.
It's just utter chaos. And then you add in the storm surge, which they're saying could hit 15 feet.
15 feet?
Yeah. That's taller than most giraffes. That kind of wall of water smashing onto the shoreline, it's just terrifying to think about.
Oh, absolutely terrifying. And the destruction would be unreal. Imagine a surge, that massive slamming into Tampa Bay. We're not just talking about some beach erosion here. We're talking widespread flooding, entire neighborhoods underwater. And it's not just homes and businesses either, it's the infrastructure too. And that water, it's got to go somewhere. So it floods the rivers, the canals, traps people who thought they were safe inland.
It's a race against time, and some people are making the tough call to stay put. The article mentions that Tampa's famous Sunshine Skyway Bridge was shut down at midday. But even with officials practically begging people to evacuate, you have people like Scott Joyner in Punta Gorda who are choosing to ride out the storm. He went through some bad flooding with Helene, but seems determined to tough it out with Milton.
That just goes to show you the impossible decisions people are facing. I mean, it's one thing to evacuate when you have somewhere to go, the means to get out, but what about those who don't? Those who feel like staying put, risky as it is their only choice. It's heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And this article paints a picture of, well, complete and utter chaos, really. They're calling up 9,000 National Guard troops, 50,000 utility workers.
Mm-hmm.
Even fuel trucks are getting police escorts.
Wow.
It's like they're throwing everything they've got at this thing.
Yeah, it's a desperate attempt to keep things going, get those resources where they're needed most. But it also really drives home the magnitude of what they're up against. When you've got pops escorting gas tankers, you know things are about to get very real.
It does make you wonder, is it going to be enough? I mean, this article, it says streets in Charlotte Harbor are still buried under debris from Helene from just 2 weeks ago. What happens to all that junk when Milton's winds hit?
Oh, man, it's not good. We're talking flying debris. A lamp could turn into a missile. A piece of plywood becomes a guillotine. Anything not nailed down as a weapon in those kinds of winds.
Yeah.
That's where those evacuation orders, they're not messing around. It's not just a suggestion, it's a matter of life or death.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get caught up in the immediate crisis here, but this article also brings up climate change, which is kind of looming over all of this. They specifically talk about Hurricane Helene being an example of how climate change can make a hurricane's strength and the rainfall way worse.
Right.
It's like someone turned up the heat on hurricane season.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about, slightly wetter storms either. These hurricanes are getting bigger, stronger, and way more destructive. The warmer ocean temperatures, it's like they're fuel for these storms. And the planet's heating up, so we're basically giving them more fuel to burn.
Right.
It's a vicious cycle, and it feels like the stakes are just getting higher every hurricane season.
Absolutely. And, this article might focus on Florida, but this is a global issue, right?
Yeah.
What's happening in Tampa Bay today, it could easily be happening in any coastal community tomorrow. It makes you think about those 50,000 utility workers they're sending in. That's a massive mobilization effort. But it also makes you realize how likely widespread power outages are. Are we really ready for that, not just as individuals, but as a society?
It's the big question, isn't it? And it's something we need to be asking ourselves more and more. The world's so interconnected now. Disruptions in one place, they have a ripple effect. Supply chains, economies, even global security, they're all impacted. We can't just react to these events anymore. We have to be proactive, We got to build a more resilient future.
You've mentioned resilience a few times, and it makes me think about people like Scott Joyner, that guy who's riding out the storm despite the risk. Rebuilding infrastructure, that's one thing. But what about the human cost? How do you even begin to put lives back together after going through not one, but two massive hurricanes back to back like this?
It's about way more than bricks and mortar, that's for sure. It's about rebuilding communities, rebuilding hope. The mental and emotional toll of these events is just immeasurable. And it's something we need to talk about more openly and honestly. The trauma of displacement, losing loved ones, homes, livelihoods. These are scars that can last long after the water's gone.
Absolutely. And it's not just the human cost, but the economic one, too. You've got businesses boarded up, tourism on hold, whole industries just thrown into chaos. Florida's economy depends a lot on its coastline, but how do you bounce back when that coastline gets hit by these increasingly powerful storms over and over again?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question, right? And it's not just Florida either. Coastal communities all over the world are facing this new reality. We've got to start thinking about sustainable solutions, about adapting to this changing climate, instead of just reacting to it after the fact. We got to be smart, we got to be resourceful, and we got to be compassionate. Because when it comes down to it, we're all in this together.
It really puts things in perspective. As we wrap up our deep dive on Hurricane Milton, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
With all the craziness and uncertainty, I think there's a really powerful message here. Knowing what's up is huge.
Yeah.
The more you understand about what's going on, how hurricanes work, how climate change plays into it, what resources are out there to help, the better you're going to be at making smart choices. Not just for yourself, but for your community, too.
That's a good point.
It doesn't matter if you're in Florida, bracing for impact or watching it all unfold from somewhere else entirely. Just remembering that being aware is the first step to actually doing something.
Couldn't agree more. We've covered so much ground today, from the raw power of these storms to the human side of it all, the resilience, the ways people adapt. Any last thoughts before we sign off?
I think this whole thing, it's a massive wake-up call. This isn't just another hurricane, It's showing us, point blank, that our world is changing. The decisions we make right now, together and on our own, are going to determine how we handle the storms down the road, literally and figuratively.
Wow. Well said.
So let's use this moment, the shared experience. Let's use it to start a real conversation, to really commit to building a safer, more sustainable future for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Hurricane Milton.
Yeah.
To all our listeners out there, stay safe, stay informed, and let's all do our part to create a more resilient future.